In Amadeus, the story is that Salieri basically kills Mozart. And in some versions, he actually poisons him. There were many rumors that Salieri poisoned Mozart because he was jealous of him, and this is how Mozart died. This is just simply not true. That's certain. He was not poisoned. But how did we get then the rumor of Salieri killing Mozart? That's simple. Salieri and Baron von Swieten and many people who worked for Joseph II were fired by the new emperor. He just up and fired them. He dismissed them. And Salieri never had it so good as he did under Joseph II, where he's court composer. And he also had a degenerative kind of issue which caused him to be institutionalized, very similar to Amadeus. But it wasn't a priest who went to see Salieri, it was a composer, and never, ever, ever talk to a composer. I'm telling you that right now. Composer comes to see you, whatever state you're in, mum's the word. Don't talk to composers, right? So a composer by the name of Moscheles is the one that goes to see Salieri, and Salieri at this point is in a state where he's really not sane anymore, right? He says something about, I killed Mozart, I killed him, like whatever. and what's that about? It wasn't about anything, and Moscheles didn't really take it that seriously, I don't think. Anyway, but he did write it in his journal, and it did get circulation. And many people started to become attracted by this idea, because here you have Salieri being jealous of Mozart, and that makes a great story. And the first person to write this was the great Russian writer Alexander Pushkin, Pushkin. Pushkin, who also dies in his 20s, is this brilliant, brilliant writer in Russian. And he writes a play called Salieri and Mozart. So he beats the Amadeus film crew and Schaeffer, to the draw by hundreds of years. It was a very popular play, and everybody loved the idea of hating Salieri. Now, this poor Salieri, this poor guy, right? He earns an honest living. Maybe he's an Italian living in Germany and living in Austria, living in Vienna, and he's doing very well there because you know about the rage for Italian opera, and who better to do that than an Italian, right? And he does interact with Mozart, but Mozart seems to have liked him. Salieri may have been a little cold to Mozart or not really helped him with his operas or whatever. But this whole thing is really quite unfair to our friend Salieri, who was very kind to Schubert, who taught Beethoven as well, and was a fixture on the scene during some of the most remarkable years in Vienna. So the poor guy posthumously has had a fate that you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. He dies, he lives his life with some kind of thing. He's buried in the central cemetery in Vienna. And he becomes this demon forever. He's tormented, right? He's always the bad guy. And then Amadeus comes around in 1985 and wins 6 Emmys, and everybody watches it to this day because it's such a brilliant movie. But you're going to see that the story of how Mozart died and the story of the Requiem Mass has nothing to do with our friend Salieri. That is a convention that goes back to Pushkin. And in Amadeus, there is no regard for factual accuracy. What they're trying to do is talk about how jealousy can consume someone. And I believe it's a statement for all musicians. I have never known a musician who's watched that movie and said, hey, I'm just like Salieri. That's cool, right? No, every musician I know has watched it and secretly said, yeah, I'm a little like Mozart. I see myself in that. That's a little bit like what I'm like, or I want to be like that, right? But the reality is we have both of those sides in us. We have a genius side, and we have this crazy evil side, right? And we're jealous, and we're angry, and we feel that we haven't, whatever. And so if you look at it that way, it's really much more profound. And what the movie is about is it's about Salieri making a pact with God. And he sees in his mind that God has responded and said, yes, we're going to make you an immortal composer. And then it seems that Mozart is really going to be the immortal composer. And Salieri is Only the person who can recognize this. Salieri works his whole life to become a musician, to become a composer, does everything that he's supposed to do, but all he's able to do is recognize that someone else was chosen by God. And Mozart seems to have done nothing to deserve this. He's giggling, he's rude, he's laughs too loud, and he has no morals and all the rest of this, and it's not fair. And that's what the movie comes down to, and it's very brilliant at doing that. That's why in the death scene, it is Salieri that is with Mozart, pushing him to the brink where he dies. This is not true. None of this happened. Salieri is nowhere around and has nothing to do with the actual scene of the Requiem itself. So far, so good. Myth number one, raining, pouring rain, family beaten back. Boom, false. Myth number two, Salieri poisoned Mozart. Myth number two, completely false. So what did happen with the Requiem? All right, the story is that Count Walsegg, and you see the name Walsegg in our book. Anyway, Walsegg is how Walsegg is spelled. Count Walsegg is of the aristocracy. He is 27 years old. He's a young guy when this happens. I would go so far as to say he's still a kid, but that shows my age. His wife, Anna Walsegg, has died, and she is only 20. Because he's wealthy and he loved his wife, he wants to create a fitting memorial for her, both in a tombstone, a mausoleum, a monument to her life that's going to be permanent, and he wants to create some music. Now, we believe that Count Walsegg intended to steal this music from Mozart. I'm not sure that I'm 100% convinced that he meant to steal it. He did definitely want it to be anonymous, and he wanted it to be private. He didn't want Mozart to know who he was and why he was commissioning it or who it was for. Now, perhaps he was going to rewrite it and pass it off as his own. That's at least the story that we get from most sources. But he commissioned many composers to write music, and he often redid the parts himself or had someone who was a musical servant redo the parts. And then he would ask the players, who do you think wrote this? And if they guessed him, that would be kind of cool. But, I don't know exactly. But I know that, and we can be certain that it was Count Walsegg who commissioned it. His wife is 20 years old, and here's the deal. There is a painting of a famous military leader who was a field marshal, and this field marshal had died in there was a huge celebration when this person died. The field marshal's name was von Laudon, V-O-N, and next word L-A-U-D-O-N. And von Laudon had this huge structure built for his casket to be inside of, right? And it was a 3-day celebration, really grand scale. Mozart wrote music for that particular event, and that is Koelschel 594. He wrote a piece for a mechanical organ to be played at this ceremony. Now here's where this gets interesting. Walsegg sees representations of this field marshal's tomb and decides that would be the right scale for my wife. So he models his wife's mausoleum on the field marshal's mausoleum, And because Mozart had written music for the field marshal, he commissions Mozart to write music for his wife. You see how that works? It's a very, very brilliant kind of echoing. So Mozart wrote